Now, what we've all been waiting for, Martina Thompson will be speaking for us. She came all the way down here from Fort Wayne, and we so appreciate you driving through this weather and coming to speak to us.
All the way up there.
Thank you.
Stormy morning. We've been doing a little series on the 7 principles. Oh, but first I'm going to start with a meditation. So this last Sunday of Black History Month, let's remember Reverend Jason. Died on the 17th. And he imagined a version of America where the marginalized were the center. He had a much more progressive vision than the Democratic Party at the time when he ran for president. For example, you had the Rainbow Coalition, but Rainbow was not, understood as an emblem of the LGBTQ community at that time, but he was an early proponent of same-sex marriage, and he advocated for that from the time that he ran for president in '84. Laid the groundwork for a new era. He frequently urged his followers to use the phrase, "I am somebody." And I think that was the same thing as saying, "I am a person of inherent worth and dignity." And he said, leadership cannot just go along to get along. Leadership must meet the moral challenge of the day. So let's just take a moment and reflect. Before we do, I have just one story to share. A friend of mine grew up in Chicago, African-American woman. And she talks about when she was young, when she'd walk home from school, you'd get stopped when you went through neighborhoods and they'd say, "Who are you with?" And what they were asking was for your gang affiliation. And she would say, "I'm with Jesse." And they let her go by. So let's just take a moment to think about his legacy. All right. So we all know the first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of all persons. And we know the 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of existence. And many of us know the 8th principle, which hundreds of our congregations adopted. It's journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community through actions that accountably dismantle racism and other forms of oppression. What about the squishy middle between the first and the last? Without, it's not up there. And without looking in the back of the book, what other ones can you name? And don't feel bad, because I'm hard pressed too, as well.
Respect the democratic process.
There you go. Yeah. The one that always comes to mind for me is a responsible search for truth and meaning. But, we're a little more sketchy on the ones in the middle, the squishy middle. So this morning, we're going to talk about one of those, the sixth principle, which is the goal of community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And its cousin in the values, the shared values, the closest one that I found is justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all feel welcome and can thrive. Well, what does living into this principle look like in 2026? It can seem like some just grand, unattainable words from a generally more optimistic era. January 2026 was one of the longest Januaries in history, even though it had the same 31 days that they always have. We all watched in horror as our vibrant city to the north of us, Minneapolis, Minnesota, was invaded by masked government agents who tear gassed peaceful protesters, entered homes without judicial warrants, and shot peaceful protesters in the street. Black and brown people were just assumed to be illegal immigrants or aliens, as they call them, subject to brutal detention. Vulnerable people were afraid to go out in the street, afraid to go to the grocery store, afraid to take their kids to school, afraid to go to a doctor's appointment. It didn't look like life in the United States, a former democracy. So as religious liberals, religious liberals who believe in that most people are good and decent, and it's tough times for the home team in this era. But the thing that preserved hope and optimism was the indomitable spirit of the people of Minneapolis. Every day we saw them standing up for their neighbors. And so let's see, can we go to that first? Just some images from Minneapolis. This guy. He came walking through the tear gas and said, "I'm 70 years old and I'm just effing angry." And then I found out he owns a fantasy bookstore. And it's like, he just looks like that's who he is. And he has this Bilbo Baggins quality, and the bad guys have come into his shire and he's not having it. Let's go to the next. After both Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy were shot, the community just rose up organically to have memorials and rituals to basically make that sacred ground. Let's go to another one. And, stop deporting our neighbors. They know who their neighbors are. And just out in the bitterly cold weather, the hardy stock of Minneapolis braving the brutally cold temperatures to organize resistance to ice, escorting kids to school, delivering food to people who were afraid to leave their homes, brandishing whistles and signs. And then when the two, when Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy were shot, by mass federal agents. The people were not deterred. More people than ever signed up for training to be constitutional witnesses. Brass bands played at protests, drum sets. I saw one day they set up just every drummer in town brought his drum set and set it up along one of the main streets of downtown. And they just drummed all day. Let's go to another one. I don't even remember all. That was it? Okay, that's great. There was Native Americans held a powwow. I've never seen such beautiful regalia that these tribes had, but they were dancing. They were reminding us that all of this was happening on their sacred land, and they were not happy. Quiet it was not. Quiet it was not, but it was almost entirely peaceful. And UUs were there. They were bravely and strategically finding ways to make justice. And I'm sure saw the bright yellow stoles. Local UU ministers were part of those organizations delivering groceries to those that couldn't risk going out of the house. And they marched outside of detention centers, not just in Minneapolis, but across the country. They showed up at Dilley, Texas to protest conditions there. For more than a decade, local UU clergy in Minneapolis have been a part of March, which stands for Multi-Faith, Anti-Racial Change and Healing. And this is the organization that issued the nationwide call for clergy to come to Minneapolis. It was an interfaith call. And, in the tradition of Martin Luther King's call for clergy to come to Selma. I've got a note here from Reverend Ashley Horan. She's one of the pastors of a major congregation in Minneapolis. And she says, since Operation Metro Surge began in December, Minneapolis has been deep in the work of protecting one another and caring for our neighbors. My neighbors and I have had to constantly and creatively respond to ICE's violent occupation of our streets. Yet amid these horrors, I have never been prouder to belong to this beautiful, resilient city. And I have never felt more rooted in and buoyed by Unitarian Universalism. This faith is unequivocally showing up here and across the country with clarity and courage, refusing fear and injustice, and proclaiming the power of love to transform our world. As a Minneapolis clergy person, I have organized locally for more than a decade with March, the organization that issued the nationwide clergy call that welcomed over 600 faith leaders, including 200 UU ministers. Now think about that for a minute. We are less than 1% of the population of the country. So there are 1,500 congregations, but a good many of them don't have ministers. And there are a lot of ministers that work directly for the UUA in Boston and in the various regions, but I don't know the exact amount. I should have gotten the number. I probably could have found it, but I don't think we've got a lot over 1,500 ministers in total. And many of them, are of advanced years. 200 of them went to Minneapolis in the middle of the brutal cold. And she continued reading from Reverend Ashley Horan. Their powerful witness, courageous action, and spiritual care were a blessing that fortified my city and ignited a groundswell of hope and action across the country. Several of them got arrested. Ripples are still spreading out from the hundreds of clergy who came and witnessed the truth of what is happening here and deepened their skills and connections to prepare for powerful, faithful, and strategic responses in all our communities. Here's the part I want every Unitarian Universalist to know. Without the skill, strategy, and infrastructure of Side with Love, oops, get a little too excited there. The March clergy call could not have happened. When March conceived of the clergy call less than a week before we asked people to come, we knew we would need massive support to pull it off. In those 6 short days, here are just a few of the things, and I'm not going to go through the whole list, but I'll name a couple that Side with Love and the UUA offered. They managed and distributed travel stipends to hundreds of participants. They provided secure registration, Zoom hosting, and 2 mass know before you go webinars. They vetted 1,000 potential registrants to verify their identities and their legitimacy. They created a resource guide called Solidarity with Minnesota. And they provided an in-person videographer, photographer, and reporter to contribute to both the march, which is that against racism and community healing, to that organization and the UU Wolves coverage. And they just initiated quick planning of a series of ice out events that took place over the week. She doesn't say it, but I think that was certainly contributed to convincing ICE to leave, to have that many clergy show up. If we're going to be able to collectively meet this moment with all its complexity, we must continue to invest in progressive institutions like the UUA, like March, like Side with Love. And she encourages you to go to the UUA website and to the Side with Love campaign and make donations so that they can continue their work. I hope that you really do feel pride in this. You should. We are a tiny liberal religious movement. Local congregations are working with multi-faith groups across the country to organize the kind of mutual aid that took place in the networks that can deliver food, that can just provide care to the community. We are meeting this moment. That's the new buzzword. There were all kinds of workshops last year at General Assembly, and they are again this year. And then there are a series of meetings and seminars about meeting the moment. What are we doing to meet the moment? What is called for? And we are really creating beloved community and contributing to peace, liberty, and justice for all. And we might not know the number of that principle. It's 6, by the way. But we know how to do it. I was not overly impressed at first with the new concept of the shared values. But the thing that has grown on me over the last couple of years that we've been using that model alongside the principles, is the insistence that it be centered in love. Because honestly, when you look at what went on in Minneapolis, that is what love looks like in action. That is centered on love and love of their marginalized communities, of a vibrant, multicultural society. That is what we are at our best. So, thank you. Every time that I come here, I say, who knows what country we'll be living in when I show up next. It's different every time. Turn this off so you don't have to listen to me.
Thank you very much. And we are here centered in love. Thank you. For our closing words from Cheryl Block, as we go forward. As we go forward into this frightening, exhilarating, confusing, miraculous world, may we offer our comfort to the afflicted, our love to those who are lonely, and our wish for all to be safe. Amen.